Hello and welcome to another episode of FTD Talk. My name is John James and I am a writer and campaigner for male victims of female perpetrated domestic violence. Now we all know, don't we, that abusers are cruel and heartless, but throw into the mix that their victim is disabled. That takes it to a new level of evil. Clive is blind, and in this episode he tells his story of being a survivor of abuse. I hope you find it interesting.
Well, hello, Clive. Welcome to FTD Talk.
Hello, John.
And thanks for talking to me today.
It's a pleasure. Having read your book, it's nice to be able to catch up voice to voice at last.
It is. It's been a long time that we've been connected, but never actually spoke. So this is nice. I want to start by just, as I start all my podcasts, by just asking you how you met what was to become your abuser.
I went to a church fair on one Saturday just before Christmas and went for coffee, and she sat down at the table with me and we got chatting, and basically slowly we took it from there. So it was actually a church thing. She's a churchgoer, I'm a churchgoer, but we have different, we like different types of worship, basically, we found out later on, but it was through church.
And how did you come to be together? Did it just blossom from there?
It sort of blossomed from there, yes. We swapped phone numbers at the end of the conversation, and she said she was going into town, so I walked into town with her and we chatted a bit more, and I spoke to her a bit later on in the week over the phone, and sort of, we were asking all the things, what sort of things do you like? What are your hobbies? And I think, looking back on it, this might have been, I've not heard it quoted as a red flag before, but I wonder whether it might possibly have been a red flag that when I said something like, what sort of food do you like? Her answer would be a long list of things that she didn't like. I can't stand this and I don't like this and whatever. Had I realized then, that might have actually said to me, if I knew then what I know now, here's somebody who's going to be hard to please.
Yeah. And how long was it before you noticed that things weren't quite right?
I think it was after we had got engaged, and the first thing that I noticed was I'd been married before, and it was a very brief marriage, and only within about 2 or 3 years of this one. And we were doing we were working out the seating arrangements. And I said, you have all of your family there, but only 2 of mine can come up from Somerset. My father and my one of my twin sisters' husband. So I said, I would like them to be close to the front of the, close to the top table, because I want to be able to hear the voice familiar, as I should explain to listeners, being registered blind. I wanted to hear the familiar voices of people I knew well, including my relations. And she said, yeah, okay, that sounds reasonable. So she wrote it down. But when I took it to the person later on that I had to take the seating arrangements for the building, I discovered then that she'd written 2 of her friends in there, and she'd relegated my brother-in-law to the back of the room to sit with the members of her family that she liked least, and that he'd never met before. So she'd actually conned me into thinking, yes, I'll put down your brother there, and then in fact did what she would have done if I had said nothing. And it was a case, and looking back, I can't help wondering whether that was the first case of what the eye don't see, the heart don't grieve about. So I might be able to get away with it.
And it's using your disability against you as well, isn't it? And I understand she did that a lot.
Yes, she did. There had been occasions, for example, where she had placed, on one occasion, she placed a very sheer garment halfway up the stairs. And while I was walking upstairs, she put a coat on the stairs, and I was coming down the stairs halfway and slipped on the garment, and thankfully didn't do myself any serious injury, but came down on my back.
Wow.
Because I didn't see it there to dodge it, and she knew I wouldn't.
Did she admit that she'd done that, or?
No, I was there with a friend who witnessed it.
Oh, right.
And we called her out, and she tried to gaslight it. What she said was, I didn't put it there, it fell off the coat rack. And both of us being of a sort of an analytical bent, we immediately said, now look, a coat cannot fall off off a coat rack and float upwards and land 6 feet away to its right. If it falls off the coat rack, it would have landed on the shoe rack immediately down below. You cannot give us that. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So
and we had another one. Some of these, I imagine there were a lot more things going on than I ever found out about after we left. Her twin sister said to me, I was appalled. We came round to visit you at one time and you had tea out in the garden with glasses of wine. They were in plastic glasses. And I said to Anne, now, look, you cannot serve wine in that glass. Wash it up. It's absolutely filthy. And her response was, oh, give it to Clive then. He won't know.
Ooh, that's nasty. So did that escalate from there? The abuse?
Yes, it did. I mean, there were other types of abuse involved that were not related to the disability as well, but I'll come on to those later.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that we found out was I was giving a certain amount a month to an overseas charity. And they were sending letters to me, which was naughty of them as well, saying, if we do not hear back from you, we will take an increased amount from your bank account. And she wasn't reading out that bit of the letter to me. She wouldn't read out all of the letter, because if I said, could you read all of it, she would actually come a martyr and start telling me what a burden I was. Oh, I have to do all of this for you. Now look what you're asking me to do. You can wait, sort of thing. And then whenever I said it, it was later, and then finally stop pressurizing me. And what had happened when my current wife came to live, she read out the first letter verbatim, and in the time that I was with my abusive wife, my donation, I should really have looked at the bank account, so I take sort of partial responsibility, but you don't when it's a charity. You don't distrust a charity necessarily, but perhaps I should have done, because I didn't distrust. But then again, I didn't know that the letters were there to be read. It had gone up from £9 to 37 in the 10 years that we were married without my knowing.
Wow.
A month.
And she never told you that?
And she never told me that. Whenever she would maliciously withhold evidence when she was reading out information, when she was reading out the post to me. She would read out everything every so often and say, this is a red reminder. If you have any sort of inquiry, if you have any inquiries about this, you can contact us on phone number. And I'd say, okay, can you tell me what the phone number is, because I do need to contact them. And then we get into all of this, after all I've done for you sort of routine and your hard work. And then it escalated into, nobody else will ever want you. You're too much hard work for anybody.
And how did that make you feel, Clive?
It made me feel, I'm trying to think of the word, I suppose, humiliated and worthless, I suppose I would say to that. And especially when she used to talk, she would sometimes talk to me as if I were a child who just wet themselves, sort of. We were in a cafe after we'd been to visit the British Sound Museum, and we'd had a cake. And in front of other people, she was saying things like, let's have a look at your hands, as if I was a 5-year-old who, you know, it was infantilizing. That was very humiliating. I'm trying to think. There was another one of those, and I can't think of it now. But I will if I come back. If it comes back to me, again, because it was on the tip of my tongue just then. But you know, there were other instances. Oh yes, I know what it was. A taxi was late taking us back to the airport on one holiday, and the Spanish taxi driver could speak excellent English, so would have heard what she would said. And I heard her say loudly in front of him, and if that's not bad enough, I've got a blind husband to see to. Now, you see to somebody who's just pooped their nappy. You don't see to a husband who's actually paying for your holiday.
Jesus. And was this continuous? Was this a daily occurrence?
I would say at least a couple of times a week. I don't know why it was, but there were times, especially over the weekend, when I could sense that something would be happening in a few hours' time. It was almost a sort of, I got an innate sense of this, in the sort of way that some people can tell when it's going to thunder.
Yeah.
You know, it's almost like the emotional atmosphere became close and oppressive. And then I knew that something somewhere was going to happen. You know, she would set conditions as if she was giving a dog rewards, a dog a bone for having done something good, sort of thing. She would say things like, if you go upstairs and help me to clear everything out of the the second bedroom, because there's too much in it at the moment. If you go up and clear up as I between 2 and 4 o'clock in the evening, I might make love to you at 4:15.
Good God.
So it was a bargaining tool. It was a sort of, you'll get a sweetie if you're a good sort of thing, which was the biggest turn-off you can ever imagine.
And did you ever tell anybody about this?
I told my best friend about it, first of all, and he basically said, yeah, I think this is probably abuse, and if you're going to need to find a way of getting out of it, because if you don't, he said, eventually it'll drive you so mad, then you'll do yourself or her an injury, and you could even end up in prison. I can see how she would drive you round the bend, because she drives everybody round the bend. She was not one of these pavement angel, home devil sort of abusers who charm the birds out of the trees to everybody else. He said to me at one time, she's like that with me as well. He said, but the difference is I go home from it. You have to go home to it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're trapped with that.
I used to have these sort of internalizations. I used to sort of say to myself, "Oh my God, I want to go home," and then the answer inside my head would be, "Oh bugger, I'm already there."
And how did it escalate from the basically picking on your disability?
Well, I'll tell you one more before I go on to the escalation of it, and that is we went over to Paris one year at her birthday, and she would say things like, she would be taking a photograph and she would say, there are some very attractive girls over there and they're all laughing at you. Or, you don't realize, but the people that you think like you don't like you at all. And in fact, behind their back, they're saying that you're ugly. She would say things like that, but you wouldn't know you were ugly because, of course, you can't see your own face in the mirror. So I have to tell you.
So
That's how
that must have been devastating to you.
It was. It was. It sort of made it and eventually, you know, if you've got so much of this, you believe this sort of thing, and it's one of the reasons. It's almost like borderline personality. It's almost, I hate you, don't leave me. But then it escalated further physically, and she didn't used to hit me about or anything like that. But the two things that put me most in danger, we went to a holiday in Devonshire with our friends, and we had to go back to up to our boarding house, guest house where we were staying. And if you can imagine, from the main street, the first two roads go up in a V shape and meet at the top, and then you go up the junction, up the road at which they meet. So you almost got a letter Y there. So whichever road you come up, you will actually get to the same place in the same time. Our friends of ours were walking back with us, and they went up one end of the V shape. She went up. She usually went up the other. So she started insisting that they'd gone the wrong way. And this is a guy who'd been going to that town for years for his holidays and knew what he was talking about. And he said, no, it's not the wrong way, Anne. It's just not your way. It's an alternative way. And you will see in a moment, etc. No, go back. And she started shouting at him. I said, and eventually I had enough of this. And I said to her, now look, he knows where he's going. He knows this place like the back of her hand. Stop making a scene, and for goodness sake, grow up. She said, oh, if you're going to be like that, I'm not going to guide you then, bugger you. And she pushed me in front of a moving car.
Jesus.
It didn't hit me, but thanks to the lightning reaction of the driver. But my friend told me later on that he had gone down the road with a face like thunder. He simply thought I'd stumbled drunk into the street. He didn't know what was going on, but he was obviously furious that I would be stupid enough to sort of fall over in front of the car, but it wasn't that as well. I challenged her about that later on, and said it was totally unacceptable. You know, no way should you ever push anybody into the road, especially somebody who can't see where they're, you know, what's happening to them. And she said, well, I can see what's going on around me, and you can't see what's going on around me. So if you tell anybody, they're going to believe me over you every time, aren't they?
Wow.
And I found that almost more scary than the incident itself. And the next thing that I said was, oh, come off it. I said, you did this in front of two cited witnesses who will stand up in court and are prepared to say what happened if I were ever to report. Because if I report, I will take one of them with me. She said, yes, but I pushed you into the street for a good reason.
And what was that reason?
She wouldn't say, but as far as she was concerned, she did it for a good reason, because
So that was going to be her story.
That would have been her story.
Yeah.
And another time, she would never guide in the prescribed way. The prescribed way, if you're using for a long cane user, as you may yourself know, is, or may not, but you know, is that you guide by the blind person taking your elbow.
Yeah.
She wouldn't have any of that, because she said I held on to her elbow too tightly. and it was doing her forearm an injury, and she'd had to go to the doctor for it. The fact that she was holding her forearm stiffly, very often up sort of pointing upwards at an angle of 45 degrees, rather than relaxing it, didn't actually help. Nor did the fact that she would often carry a heavy bag of shopping over her wrist on that arm. Now, I would have thought that would have been more dangerous. But what she did, she refused. She insisted that I had to put my hand in between her arm and her body at about armpit level, and she would clamp it tightly. I used to call it the clump and clamp technique. And then she would just trot off, and I would then have to, with a little bit of sight that I had to dodge in and out of things and sort of watch out to make sure that she didn't lead me into a lamppost. And at one time we were coming back after having stayed at a motorway stopped at a motorway service station on the way back home from one of these holidays. It might even have been the same holiday with the incident about going back to the boarding house that I told you just now, or it might have been the following year. I can't remember. And I insisted I need to be guided by the elbow so that I could feel where she was going and react to it. And she kept on pushing my hand back underneath her armpit. And eventually we were in the middle of the road, and she just broke away and said, "I'm not going to guide you then," and left me in streams of traffic zooming all around me, cars, lorries, vans, the lot, in the middle, with no way of knowing which direction to turn or whether to move. I was basically in check. If I moved anywhere, I could be checkmated all over the road. My friend had to come back and rescue me. She had left me alone in the middle of 3 lanes of very busy traffic, in the middle of a slip road to a motorway.
Christ. And what was your reaction to that when you eventually got to safety?
I can't honestly remember. What I can remember is the terror of being in that road and knowing that if I moved, I could actually move to death.
Yeah.
Because I had no idea how to dodge anything. And if I stayed where I was, as far as I knew, I could be run over as well. There were horns beeping all over me, around me, and all sorts, and I couldn't move. Frozen to the spot, I would say. Petrified would describe it literally in one word, both physically and emotionally.
Jesus. And what was she doing at this point? Did she just walk away? Just walk
She
off?
just walked away and went back to the car on her own.
Yeah. With no
I can't remember
concern
what he
whatsoever.
said, but no, that's right. I can't remember what he said. When my friend came back to me, I can't remember what he said, but he quoted verbatim what she had said. And she was clearly went back into the car and complained all the way about having to guide, etc. And I'm not going to do this. It's doing too much injury to my arm and all of that. It was all me, 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 me.
So even though she'd left you in the middle of the street in streams of traffic, it was your fault?
Yes, it was almost as though she was the only person who was real in this whole scenario. Solipsistic, if you like, just this is my world and I'm imagining it came over like that. It was crazy.
And I know that people will ask this, as they ask all abused individuals, but why didn't you leave?
Firstly, if I had left, I knew that I would have to move to a place where I wouldn't know the area. So at that time, I think I had been told that the nearest refuge that would take men was something like Scarborough, and I was in the southeast of England. And one of the reasons was that I didn't want. It didn't work. If I move into an area, I have to be taught where every street is. I need to go for lessons to find out how to get about the town, and
Mhm.
and I'm not sure how, it's things like I don't know how I would have been able to get back to work again. I don't know if I would be able to go, how long it would be before I would be able to go out of wherever I went and go to a shop to buy a packet of tissues or whatever. My independence, my environment, my friends were all around me, and that's one of the things is, as a blind person, you can't just, if you move out, if you just leave, you have nowhere to go except the house that you're in until you can get somebody to show you where everywhere else is.
So essentially, you were trapped by not only the abuse but your disability as well,
Yes.
or the
My friend had actually said, well, normally I would actually say, you should leave, but in your case, because of the upheaval that it would cause, and the disruption to your independence, I said I'm going to have to say you're going to have find some way of getting her out,
yeah.
which eventually I did. There was one instance where we had been invited to an event in Ashford, and a volunteer was going to pick us up and take us to the venue. But she came out of the wrong entrance of the station, got herself totally lost, and I was trying to call him calmly to get directions as to where to go to be able to find him, and she kept on snatching the phone away from me and shouting the odds at him down the phone. Look, I've this, I that, and so on. And eventually, on one occasion, she snatched it out of my hand and it fell on the floor, and I was lucky on the pavement. I was lucky it didn't break at that time. And eventually he said, I don't have to put up with this. I'm doing this voluntarily. I've good mind to leave you in the middle of the town, and you can find your own way. And I thought at that time, if I carry on with her, eventually she will have alienated all of my friends and family with her attitude,
Hmm.
and I would have an old age to look forward to with no company but her. And I thought, I cannot live like that anymore. So I told her, and she said, well, I am going to go to a solicitor's and I'm going to make it as difficult as possible as I can for you. It's no skin off my nose how much I pay, but I want to see you suffer for turning me out. And the family law solicitors, she kept on going from one to the other because they were telling her, this is about fair play. This is not about revenge.
Yeah. Well, at least.
And what happened then was, you see, she had said that, she wasn't able to hold down a job. She didn't want, and for some reason, she didn't want the humility of having to take benefits. So I had to pay for virtually everything throughout the marriage. All the food, all the bills, everything. And if I said at one time, I think it'd be best. I used to say, I think it would be best if you move out. And she would say, I don't want to leave because I have never stayed in a house. It was more important to her to be in the same house. I don't want to move to another house. I'm always moving from house to house, and nothing about me, nothing about the relationship. And when she left, I thought she had no money, and therefore I'd been paying for everything. She went down. She went down into town and she bought a new build flat. which I think cost around upwards of £100,000. But she bought it as a one-off down payment with money that I
Wow.
never knew that she had.
So she'd lied about that as well.
She lied about that as well. She had pots and pots of money. She was making me pay, and for everything. I used to think, your rule seems to be you say, and I pay. She makes all the decisions as to what we do and what we have and what we get. But and then get your wallet out. But all of that time, I didn't know that she had in her banks more money than I would earn in 3 years.
God.
Until afterwards, and she just went in and, yeah, I'll have that flat. Write out a check and, yeah, thank you very much, goodbye. Just exactly the same ways as if she was going in to buy a book of stamps.
Mm.
No mortgage, no nothing, just straight out.
Was it a massive relief when she did eventually go?
It was, yes, at the time, and it wasn't long before I met my present wife after that, and she couldn't have been more different.
Because we do, we do search for somebody who is loving, caring, and compassionate.
Mm.
But this is why we talk on this show, because we fall into a relationship that is exactly the opposite. But
Yes, you don't necessarily know. You don't necessarily understand the difference between genuine love and a love bomb.
Yeah. And it is. We eventually do find somebody. Hopefully, we eventually find somebody who's everything that we want.
If only we knew to take notice of the warnings or the feedback of others. The difference now I can see is that people were saying to me, I'm worried about what will happen if you and she get together, but she was being perfectly nice to me until the moment we got married, and then it all changed. It was almost like now that she'd caught the bus, she'd been running for a bus, and now that she'd caught it, it was okay to throw the sweet papers all over the floor. It just changed in the moment that we married, sort of thing. But if only we could know to recognize the warning signs of others. The difference between the two relationships is that a lot of people were expressing concerns about, no, can you take that out? A lot of concerns about my abusive partner and the way that she would be treating me and what they'd noticed about her. With my current partner, my current wife, nobody had a bad word to say. Nobody has ever had a bad word to say to her, about her, if you like. But you don't. You discount all of those warnings and you think, well, we're in love, we'll get through of it. She's nice enough to me. You're talking out the top of your heads or whatever, and you go headlong straight into it.
I think you can write all the books you want about red flags, but when you're in that situation, you just don't see them. It isn't until after that experience, I think, trains you to notice these red flags.
Yes. I don't write books, I write pop songs, and I've got a pop song. And a long time ago, before I did this, based around, inspired by something that I'd seen when it had happened in the film of Buddy Holly's autobiography, I wrote a rock and roll song, which is exactly about this. But that's not the one, that's not the song that we'll be talking about later. But I'd realised now that I'd covered the red flag thing in 2.5 minutes flat.
And you said, I know that you wanted to talk about disability in general.
Yes. Now, one of the things that happened with my previous wife was she lost her temper and started throwing stiletto shoes at me at one time. Not that heavy, but if the heel had gone into my eye, goodness knows what would have happened. You know, I could have at least got a bloody nose, and who knows what it'd be the next time. I reported to the police, and the guy on the reception desk was brilliant, but he said, "Well, if you go out into a designated place in town, we'll send a squad car round." And the guys in the squad car just didn't get it. It was all sort of, "How old are you?" And I told them how old I was, and they said, "Well, why don't you just go? You're old enough to know better. Grow up, man up. Go home, kiss and make up. You're coming to us because somebody threw a shoe at you. We've been chasing people around, going earlier on the evening, going around with people, you know, with knives and things." And I was actually, and I was thinking, you don't get it because if you're blind, you don't have the luxury of being able to duck anything coming your way. The first you're going to know is wham.
Yeah.
And then she came along. She'd followed me out of the house, and she came along and she turned on the sort of soft voice like Professor Umbridge in Harry Potter. And she said, "Can I have my shoe back, please?" And then she starts going into something, "You don't know what it's like living with him," and so on. And, you know, she did the full Monty on all of that. Which is one of the reasons why I have so much sympathy for Johnny Depp. And they swallowed it whole, and immediately she'd come out with that. She was getting there, my dear, and from that moment on, I was getting, "Now look here, sir." But they had picked the wrong person, because I worked before I retired, I worked in equality and diversity, and my first substantive boss in that post had moved over to Kent Police. Sorry, had moved over to the local police, and we got him together with my friend, my best friend, who had been, you know, the one I've mentioned before, you know, who was there at with the other incidents and so on,
Yeah.
who knew what was going on. And we got a message with we got a meeting with one of the victim support people, and they picked on the wrong people because he had them marched off to some very, very thorough equality and disability awareness training within the fortnight. He said, "I'll make sure they never do anything like that again." But they didn't see, it was almost as though there is a vulnerability around disability, but you're a man. So I felt at the time that the messages, if you like, on the T-shirts were conflicting. There was a vulnerability from disability, and there was, this is a man, and therefore probably the perpetrator. And the gender trumped, in their approach to me, the gender completely trumped the disability, and they overlooked the fact that it would be worse if she had thrown a vase at me next time. I don't know where I don't know where I would have woken up, if I would have woken up, but I wouldn't have been able to duck my head and let it go against the wall, because I wouldn't have been able to see it, and that's what they didn't see. But generally, I think the whole idea of firstly having a disabled man who is a victim of abuse is in some ways a paradox, and it's not talked about. It just isn't talked about, because I've heard from others that where people present on domestic abuse and disability, they are only interested in disabled women.
Yeah.
If you examine the statistics, a significantly higher proportion of women than men who are disabled are said to experience domestic abuse. But if you look at it in the general picture, when they talk about 6% of people have said that they've experienced or whatever, you find that a disabled man is no more, it's on a par, it's no more and no less likely to experience domestic abuse than a non-disabled woman. But the difference is, because he's a disabled man, he's a man, and therefore there's not very much, there is less support, significantly less support. And because he's disabled, whether you're a disabled woman or you're a disabled man, there are questions about the accessibility of some of those, of some of the support that's available, whether or not there is I don't know whether there is disability awareness, comprehensive disability awareness training from people who are running refuges for anybody. I just don't know. Yeah. It's never spoken about because 9 times out of 10 people are talking about disabled women only, and they tend, and I noticed this as well, that when they were talking about disability in the evidence gathering for the domestic abuse bill, all of the conversation was about disabled women, and almost all of the conversation was also about disability and how it relates to a caring role. It was all about care. It was all about taking advantage of somebody's money because you are their carer and you come into the house, etc. But there is more to disability, more to disabled people's abuse that they experience than that. And the example I would quote is, I have to tell you because you can't see that you're ugly. Sort of thing. That's not about caring. And I know of another disabled man, a guy in a wheelchair, who told me that his abusive partner had turned his daughter against him to such an extent that she was almost worse than the wife. And he was in a wheelchair and he had crutches. And he could not walk at all without crutches. Couldn't get back into the house without them. He had to walk into the house. And so at one time, at lunchtime, she came out and she said, it'd be lunch in 5 minutes. And then she threw his crutches down to the far end of the garden and said, if you want any, you're going to have to go and get them, aren't you? And walked away and left him stranded.
Jesus.
So there is more. And the other thing that I've recently discovered, we'll come on to the song that I've written, but and what's happened with that. But somebody who heard it wrote to me and told me their story as a disabled woman, and who had experienced abuse from their male partner. And the similarities between what we had experienced were far more striking than the differences.
Yeah.
Because we were talking about the disability angle. Somebody that I know who worked for a long time in the field of tackling disability hate crime has suggested that where domestic abuse is driven by the disability, it should be looked at when they're thinking about prosecuting anybody. It should be, if anything, looked at as a disability hate crime first and abuse second. If it happened to you because you're disabled, and it wouldn't have happened to you if you didn't have that disability, and the experience is not good, that's it. It's a disability hostility thing. It's a disability hate thing. So you can in other words, that would mean what happens in law with disability hate crime is if somebody is prosecuted for, say, domestic abuse against you, they could get one sentence. But if they did it, and if it could be shown that they did it as a way of taking advantage of you because of your disability and running rings around your impairment and that sort of thing, then the sentence should be stiffer.
Yeah, definitely.
Because it's both, and therefore the disability. What happens is domestic abuse, whatever the charge is or whatever, aggravated by the fact that it's a disability hate crime. They should get a stiffer sentence for it. Is his idea, and I agree with that. But we must start talking more about disability and disabled men as well as disabled women, because as I say, it doesn't. A disabled man is virtually as likely to experience as a non-disabled woman, but because he's a man, he's locked out.
Well, I think you're right there. I think we do need to start talking about this, and you're right in the fact that most of the talking is around carers abusing, and there's very little talk about partners abusing.
Yes, and deliberately, and the other thing is deliberately keeping you dependent on them so that they can then get the kudos if they need self-esteem, their self-esteem boosting, by then getting people saying, oh, isn't it wonderful what she has to put up with, or whatever, which my friend used to say, oh, I can tell she's playing the martyr again now, sort of thing. And she used to say, when she's not around, you seem 10 years younger than when she's with you, because you're so wary, making sure you don't say the wrong thing all of the time.
Yeah.
Which is quite common, isn't it?
Yeah, the walking on eggshells is common in every kind of abuse. Yeah.
Mm. I mean, there was one time when she had a stand-up. She started a stand-up round, shouting at me for goodness knows how long, simply because I had dried my hands on her towel instead of mine by accident.
Yeah.
That is mine. You leave it alone. It's mine, sort of thing.
Yeah, the petty little things can explode into gigantic things.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that she used to do is sleep, which I haven't mentioned, is sleep deprivation. If she didn't get her own way on anything during the day, she would wake up at 1 o'clock in the morning and she would be complaining about that, and then complaining about all of the other things that had gone wrong in her life, for which it was always everybody else's fault, until about 3:30 in the morning, and would not stop. And I went to sleep miserable, and I woke up the following morning tired, and my boss at the time noticed it, because there was one day that I was so tired that I nearly fell asleep in a meeting because of that. He said, what's wrong? This isn't like you. You're not at the top of your game. And she said, he said to me, the way that he put it is, you're not getting the support at home. And he was the one who told me about Mankind Initiative.
Yeah.
Which was really good. But this sleep deprivation thing, it was almost as though I wasn't there, or didn't count, or didn't matter sometimes. She couldn't sleep at 2 o'clock in the morning on one holiday. We were in a room, so she switched the light on and laid out a game of Patience and played it all over the bed. There's no way that I would be able to get to sleep with that going on. It's just, and she was acting. Sometimes she would act as if she was, if I was with her, she would sometimes act as if she was alone, as if I didn't exist.
Yeah, that's a very common way of putting you down.
Mm.
That's a lot with That's very common with a lot of abusers, where
Yeah.
they're so self-centered, so narcissistic that you don't exist
Yes.
or you don't matter.
Yes.
So the single that you've recorded, the song that you've recorded,
Yeah.
it's for Mankind Initiative, is that right?
It is. It has three purposes. It is to get the message out there, to encourage male victims to report, and to say that there is hope out there, that people are listening. And it's also fundraising. So every £10, when you go onto the website to download it, you don't buy the single, you download the single, and then you make whatever donation you want to make on that page. So it works that way. And I think it works out that every £10 given will fund another phone call from another victim. Because one thing that I would like to live to see is the day when male victims can call up any time outside of office hours, the way that women do. There are Refuge and Women's Aid or whatever 24/7. Something like Mankind is sort of Monday to Friday during some of office hours, and then if you need to speak, where do you go if you need to speak to somebody and it's 7 o'clock on a Friday night? I know somebody that mystery shopped that with National Domestic Abuse Helpline, and it was genuine. He was concerned about his son, who was experiencing, witnessing domestic abuse by his mother against his stepfather, the same sort of abuse that he'd grown up witnessing, her meting out to his father, who's also blind, incidentally. So he rang up genuinely, sort of saying the best time for him to ring would be 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock. And he rang up on Friday night. The first thing that they told him, as soon as he said this was about a male victim, the tone changed, and it all went very frosty and very sort of perfunctory, if you like. And then they said, you have to be aware that the overwhelming majority, that's what they say, the overwhelming majority of victims are women. And now I always think when I hear that, if you are in need of help, I always say about that phrase, if somebody runs you over and breaks your leg by running a bicycle over you and you need help, what use is it for you to be told at that point that there are 9 million bicycles in Beijing?
Yeah.
It doesn't help at all. And eventually, he said that the best time, because of his working hours, the best time to ring would be between 7 and 9 in the evening. So helpfully, they gave him a number and said, tell your son to ring this one back on Monday morning at 9 o'clock. And I think we got the answer with regard to who that particular helpline is actually targeted to.
Yeah.
Out of that mystery shop. But as you say, with all of that, I'd like to be able to see the time when there is enough funding for all victims that whoever you are, male, female, straight, gay, black, white, or whatever, if you need help, you will get it whatever time you ring or contact somebody to need it, rather than actually having to wait until office hours. And so this song, which is called You're Not Alone, which is slightly different from the You Are Not Alone, but basically because it wouldn't sing well if I did that, which is the government slogan for it, which Mankind have been using for about 12 years before that, by the way. And the idea is to raise funds, to raise awareness, and to give hope, and to let people know out there that it does happen to men as well.
That's a great reason to record it.
Yes. And I don't know if you're ready for it, but I can give you the URL for it.
Yes,
I can
please.
give you the web address for it, because I've deliberately gone to all the URL shortening websites to get the most simple and therefore the most radio announceable that I can get, and I've come up with tiny .tiny.cc/YNA for You Are Not Alone. That's the whole of the URL.
Okay.
tiny.cc/YNA.
Everybody who's listening, go out and take a listen to You Are Not Alone.
And also on whatever social media platform or email or anything that you've got which will lead them online, tell your friends and your friends of friends to do the same.
Definitely.
I want this to count. I want this to matter for male victims who are coming up behind me. I'm out of it, but it's time for me to give back, I think, for all that I've got from it.
And for the YouTube version of this podcast, I'll put it beneath the video. I'll put the URL beneath the video.
And there will later on in the year, we're actually working on getting YouTube video content for it as well to bring. So I will let you know when that happens too. But we're not ready for that yet because the videos are all being composed. If anybody out there is well-known, has a well-known voice or a well-known face, we're actually looking for celebrities as well to add video content to that video. And we're looking for either a 10-second clip of the celebrity with the phrase "You Are Not Alone" easily visible, say on a banner or something, or a poster or something like that, or a still photograph of the same, or if it's a well-known voice, somebody whose voice will be instantly recognizable, then we're actually looking to be able to insert where we've got the producer of the song, a friend of mine from my band days in Somerset, it actually says at the end of the song, "Remember, you are not alone." And we want to get versions for the video with different celebrities saying that, and with them actually displaying a banner or whatever, so that we can actually get support that way as well. So I want to be able to kick it into the mainstream somehow, and it's very difficult with radio plays because a lot of stations are so tightly controlled with their playlists that you have to do it first. And if Lad Baby can do it, I'd like to be able to do it as well.
Well, I'll do what I can my end, and any listeners out there can help with that, then please get in touch with either myself or Clive.
Especially if you know anybody famous. Because celebrity will bring the rest of the world to it. I can think of a couple of people that I wish I could get, but at the moment, he probably needs a lot of peace after this week.
Yeah.
I think you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, Clive, that was fascinating talk because I haven't spoke to anybody before. I try and speak to people right across the board when it comes to abuse, and I've never spoken to anybody before with a disability and the horrific stories of using that against you. So hopefully that brings it out into the forefront as well, and people recognize that. So thanks ever so much for that.
I'm hoping that there's going to be some research carried out as to the experiences of domestic abuse against disabled people, talking to more disabled people. I mean, I have a sight impairment, but I cannot speak for all disabled people. It would be worth knowing if you can find other people as well. What's it like if you're in a wheelchair? What's it like if you're if you're deaf or hard of hearing? What's it like if you have learning difficulty, etc., etc. These things, I haven't heard enough about those either.
Yeah.
And I've been looking for disabled people. So I'd like to be able to see, because there's so much we don't know. It's not even an iceberg. It's like 99% of it is underneath the surface when it comes to disability, especially if you're a man, because people will talk about when you're a disabled woman, as I said before.
Well, this is what I'm hoping with FTD Talk. I'm hoping that we can talk to many different kinds of people who've had different experiences of abuse. I've talked to gay men, celebrities, disabled, and researchers as well. So hopefully we can get more voices out there, and together we can do something positive.
Yes. Okay, and I'll send you more on that song so that it's basically we can you can introduce and you can give a taster of it if you like to close out the podcast this time, so that people will have a taste of what they're getting. It's a bit old school. It's not a rap or anything like that. It's a good old fashioned song. Some people say it's slightly Beatlish.
Awesome. Thanks so much for talking to me today, Clive.
Thank you very much for asking.
You've been taken for a ride. You've lost your pride somewhere